Hello and welcome. Today we've got Seth Holehouse, and we are going to be discussing distractions, media, and also Rittenhouse and much more. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to our Telegram channels and to nicholasveniamin.com for my free email updates. And if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, I will leave the link below in the description for the full interview. Unless, of course, myself and Seth can choose our words wisely due to the insane censorship that's happening right now. Seth, thank you for joining me. How are you and what have you been up to?
No, thank you for having me, Nick. Well, yesterday was Thanksgiving here in the States, it's always a wonderful holiday. You forget about most things that are happening. You just focus on food, family, and which it was wonderful. Of course, we got into some good political discussions with our family and nothing too contentious with the people that I was speaking to, but it was good. But now it's back to things and back to looking at what's happening in the world and trying to make sense of everything, which is not very easy to do these days.
Absolutely. Now, we know that there's a lot of distractions that are happening right now. For an example, what stands out for me the most is, Kyle Rittenhouse, where he came out, started blaming Lynn Wood. I know it's something that you brought up before we hit the record button, but that's something also that's been playing on my mind. And then we have Marjorie Greene going after Lynn Wood. And I'm thinking, what's happening here? And then we've got the Rittenhouse case that he won. And then we have Lynn Wood, defamation lawyer, who states earlier in the year that Epstein is alive and he's in custody singing like a canary. And we have the Maxwell case going forward as well, which the media is not covering. So we see some functionality within the court system. So my question is, what's stopping the November the 3rd event from coming out from the court system?
It's such a good question. And if you look at the entire media landscape, also if you look at just the legal landscape, what's happening within the court systems, I think that there's a lot of ways to look at it, I guess. And so one way I try to frame things is what are the wins that they're giving us and what are the losses that they're also delivering to us. And I think that in a lot of cases, and I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think that the legal system, especially here in America, is a lot more controlled by the cabal, or whatever you want to refer to the enemy, as people would like to think, similar to the mainstream media, even Fox News. And so even though it seems like we're having these wins, like, say Rittenhouse, yes, it's a win for not just Rittenhouse, but more importantly in America, it's a win for our Second Amendment, because that sets a precedent that if you are being attacked, especially if you're being attacked in a public place, like, we've seen videos of these BLM riots over the past couple of years where people are beaten to death, they're stomped to death, they're murdered in cold blood. Look at David Dorn, these people. So that sets a very good precedent for us to say, look, if you defend yourself justly, the court system should be on your side. And so it feels like there's a big win, similar to there was the governor Youngkin, right, who won the race for Virginia, which seems like a big win, right? It's like, oh, great. And there are a lot of patriots that were really excited about that. But then once you start to look behind these things, you can see. Now, Youngkin, I haven't made up my mind on him, but I know that up until I think it was 2020, he was the CEO of the Carlyle Group. Right, the Carlyle Group, and its members have a lot of ties with Dominion, the voting system. He's been a person that's spoken with the World Economic Forum. He was recently over in China speaking on behalf of the World Economic Forum. So there's a lot of these red flags, right? Now, with the Rittenhouse, I think that a lot of people got really emotionally caught up in it, which it's the classic story of, this from my perspective, this 17-year-old that had went, as a good Samaritan to go help his community. And people say, well, why was he even there in the first place? Well, why was BLM there burning down the city? Right? It's like, why are you angry at the medic that showed up that was trying to help people, or was cleaning up, graffiti, et cetera? And so a lot of people were really behind that and very emotionally involved, and we want Kyle to, go free and all this. And one thing that I have to keep reminding myself of is that most of what we see and most of what's put in front of us, it's bread and circuses. It's distractions, right? And like I said, Rittenhouse was important because of the Second Amendment and the precedent that that sets. But by that same token, what are these things distracting us of? What other court cases happening right now? Is it maybe Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Is it one of the most important people to be going after? But also, if you look at what happened with Rittenhouse afterwards, so you had the entire patriot movement behind this young man being free and having justice served properly, and standing up for these the rights that we have. But almost immediately after he's the verdict comes through, he's on Fox News, and all of a sudden he's going after Lynn Wood, which that to me, it raised some, I guess I'd say, like my spidey senses, my discernment started saying, wait, something's a little bit off here. And even the interview, he kept looking to the side, almost like he had a panel of attorneys or people that are kind of coaching him on what to say. And there's a few things that just seemed a little bit off, right? And then in an interview shortly after that, he's talking again about Lynn Wood and saying that, something to the effect that his family, that they fired him or separated themselves from him because Lynn Wood was into that. If we're still on YouTube, I can't mention it, but the 17 movement, right? It was talking about that, but also that Lynn Wood was really focused on the correcting November 3rd, right? Just to say it in the YouTube friendly way. And so here you have this person that has become the center of the patriot movement and the cause of free Kyle, et cetera. But now this person who so many people are airing, kind of looking to, and I think that it was Fox News had record viewership when they aired this interview. So now those same people are looking, and this guy's speaking out against someone that was trying to correct what happened November 3rd. And so to me, it just raises more red flags. And I think that going back to the bread and circuses is that I have to keep reminding myself that a lot of what we see is just theater. Now, whether Kyle is a what you call a crisis actor, I don't know. I mean, I think that more than anything that he's was there for the right reasons, for the right cause, and maybe he has some people that are in his ear now, kind of coaching him on what to say, because now he has to focus on his defamation lawsuits, et cetera. So he might have coaches, but even the fact that Fox News was the first place to air this interview, I speak pretty openly about Fox News. And in the video that I first made, The Plot to Steal America, that the president shared, I spoke about Fox News and about November 3rd and Arizona. And it's so amazing in a lot of ways how quickly we forget. It's almost like you're going to your favorite restaurant that you trust, and you trust them so much. And then one day you find out that the chef intentionally poisoned you, right? And maybe your friend died from the meal, yeah, right? But then a couple months later, you're like, oh, I really missed that T-bone steak, so I'm gonna go back there. It's like, did you forget that same chef is the one that poisoned you? And if you go into Fox, which is News Corp, and the ownership, you can see it's the same globalist entities that own Fox News, the same ones that are controlling, they have made majority shares in the big pharma and all these areas. And if you take a step back and you look at it, you're like, oh, wow, like they're literally controlled by the same people that are controlling the people that I perceive to be my enemy. And this is what's where we are. We're in the fog of war, and people don't know who to trust. They don't know what's good, what's bad. Especially if people are looking externally for validation of what's good and bad, it's even more can it become confused. And so, it's kind of long way of answering your question, but this is just where I've been at. I've been really trying to focus on these things and understand how do we have better discernment and how do we focus on what's really happening? Because while you have all these things playing out, and you have, I think, a large part of the American public almost like watching a football game or a soccer game, I hope my team wins. We scored, they scored, he cheated. Everyone's so caught up in this game in front of them that they're ignorant of the fact, or they're not paying attention to the fact of the rollout of a plan, of a globalist plan to move us into the Great Reset, to move us under, one world government. And if you look at what's happening in Australia, if you look at what's happening in Austria, some of the other European countries, Spain, they just announced that basically they're going to have mask mandates for as long as flu seasons exist, basically. So, okay, you're going to be wearing a mask for the rest of your life. And if you look at this agenda that's being rolled out, and you go back and reference, Operation Lockstep, 2010, Rockefeller Lockstep. If you look at Event 201, these different things, you can see that they've got us really distracted, and they're just steamrolling this plan to move us under their control, to push forward the digital passports, to push forward the acceptance of lockdowns, to use these, whether you have gotten this particular jab or not, to use that to divide people, to have people snitching on their neighbors. I have family in Australia, and I can see from their experiences how much it's just crippling the society. It's crippling the families, the communities, and sowing discord and division. In the Northern Territory, they've got the quarantine camps set up, and they're bringing the military in and forcefully jabbing people. And so when I look at all this together and take a step back, it's like we're in ancient Rome, and everyone's watching. They're getting their piece of bread, and they're watching the gladiators battle, and that's all they can think about. All the while, the corrupt politicians and the corrupt rulers of Rome are driving them towards destruction.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to go back to the Rittenhouse case. Now, he's a 17-year-old boy, Kyle. Do you think that he's awake to what's really going on with the deep state? Because if he's not awake and he's not aware, like we are and the viewers are, then it might be the case that he's being manipulated by the deep state to, attack Lynn Wood. And then we have, on the other hand, Marjorie Greene going after Lynn Wood. What do you think about that, if he's awake or not?
I don't think that he is. I think that there's a lot of good-hearted Americans and just good-hearted people. I'll speak to the Americans because it's where I'm at. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good-hearted Americans on both sides of the political aisle that don't grasp the evil in this world. It's what gives rise to the cognitive dissonance, that when you are sitting at dinner with your mother and you talk a little bit about, say, child trafficking or some of these things, it's like, I can't go there. Right. And so I think that with Kyle, I think that he's, again, my impression so far is that he's just a good-hearted American that wanted to step forward and do the right thing. And unfortunately, it's the good-hearted people that are easy to deceive because they're trusting. And I've had a lot of lessons in my life where I've learned not to become distrustful, right? Because I'm a very trusting person, but I've learned to acknowledge that there are very evil people in this world. And also to acknowledge that evil is also potential within me. And I think that's a really important thing. And Solzhenitsyn speaks about that in his books, about the importance of fighting the evil within yourself, acknowledging that evil is potential within yourself. And so I think that for Kyle, again, I think he's good, but I think that it would be very easy for somebody to come in that really looks like they're going to be helping and can just steer things a little bit. Because that's what it takes. It's not like he's coming out and he's saying that Trump is a fraud, or I'm pro Biden, or he's not coming out and making big, bold statements, because that's not how misinformation works. That's not how controlled opposition works. And not to say that he's controlled opposition, but I think that there's some part of the narrative that he's being used to create that is being controlled by our opposition. And unfortunately, I don't think that he would even be aware of it, especially coming out of where he is. I'm sure he's got millions of people reaching out to him. He's become a super celebrity now. He's at the center of really the world's stage. Like everyone knows who Rittenhouse is by now. And so I think that it will be difficult in that situation to really be able to gauge who's helping me, who's against me, who's good and who's bad. And that's the perfect opportunity for the deep state to come in and try to just add that little bit to the narrative, add that little bit. And then with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't know her, well. I've never met her, so I don't follow her too close. I see she speaks up against a lot of the issues that are important. Now, with her spats between herself and Lynn Wood, it's not something that I am too comfortable commenting on because I just don't know the specifics of it. But you have, say, Dan Crenshaw, who's recently come out and spoke against Lynn Wood, and I think that he's really proven himself to be a rhino. He was heavily involved with the World Economic Forum, which is always a big red flag, and there's other things that would indicate that. So again, when I look at anything happening in the media, especially, I see that the media will always tell you who they're afraid of. The media will always tell you who's right, right? And the best case of that is look at Trump, right? Look at the person that was demonized by the media more than anybody, probably in the entire history of the world, right, was President Trump, because they were scared of him because he spoke truth, he was awakening people, and he wasn't part of their system. And so when that first interview aired with Fox and Rittenhouse, and he spoke out about Lynn Wood, I was like, that's strange, right? It didn't really make sense to me. And I don't know Lynn closely. I've spoken to him before, but I know a lot of people surrounding him. And everything I've seen from him is he seems to be somebody that is calling out the highest levels of the deep state. He's calling out the things I can't talk about here on YouTube, but he's the one that's actually pushing to expose those things, especially as it relates to children, trafficking, etc. And normally, I in my experience, there's a lot of people that can toe the line. A lot of people can say, hey, there's communist infiltration and this. But once they start getting to the topic of, are they discussing November 3rd? Are they discussing the truth about what's happening with the medical tyranny? Are they discussing the truth of the cabal? And there's not many people that are actually sticking their necks out there and doing that. And so after the Rittenhouse interview, though, I saw the other one, and the other one. Now I'm seeing all these people aim their guns towards Lynn Wood. And to me, it's like, if Lynn Wood was a lying person, if he was someone that was out just, kind of crazily causing trouble and spreading false rumors and conspiracy theories, then the media wouldn't be going after him, would they? Right? The media goes after the people that they fear.
Absolutely. And I makes a lot of sense with what you're saying. And do you think it's reasonable to assume that because Kyle Rittenhouse may likely be asleep, meaning he's not aware of this spiritual war between, the white hats and the black hats, if you like, that he may be offered, a handsome payment of a sum from somebody, and he may not be aware who's who, because he's not aware of who's the bad guys and who's the good guys. And maybe that's why he kept looking around, and because maybe he was under instructions, so therefore he was released. The media lost. They weren't happy with the fact that he won the case, and they tried to get one quickly and attack Lynn Wood. And as you were saying, that Lynn Wood he's made attacks on people who are very, very high level and corrupt. And that might be the case. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance. And I think that, similar to what you said is, I don't feel ill intentions from Kyle. I think that, but if he's just on the outside of this and he's trying to figure out who to trust and who to go to. And he might have someone that says, look, these attorneys are the best and they're going to help you, and they're going to, you deserve hundreds of millions of dollars for your defamation cases. And it's going to help bring down the mainstream media because that's what the Patriots really need to do this. And he might be thinking, again, it may not be some scenario where he's in some dark alley and a guy approaches him with a briefcase of cash and says, hey, I want you to say a few things like this. But it might be that, he's legitimately this is led astray. And I'm still, I still use a lot of mights and maybes in my discussion of that because I really don't know yet. And I'm trying to feel things out. And I think that's an important point that I think that as a presenter and a journalist that you've had to learn, that I really hope that the audience can also really try to understand, is just discernment and how to take anything that happens in front of us and just don't take it at face value. Because I can tell you that, after that interview on Fox, I saw so many people, especially across Telegram, which is where a lot of the conversation's happening right now. I saw so many people attacking Lynn Wood and saying, how could you do this to Kyle and all this? And it was shocking to me. It's like, wait, you saw one interview on Fox, and now this person that's put his life out there and risked so much, you're all just going to completely turn your back and hate this person. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't true, but I'm just saying that discernment, it's like, well, what is discernment? And to me, discernment is being able to separate yourself from your notions, separate yourself from your emotions, and be able to truly look at a situation in the wisest and most unbiased way possible. And that's, to me, like, that's what I really strive to do when I look at what's happening in the world. I try to look at things and say, I'm not looking for confirmation bias. I'm not trying to look at something just to say, yeah, see, I was right. And they're saying I'm right, so I'm going to believe them. And I'm also not looking at something and trying to separate myself from the emotional response of being like, yes, like Glenn Youngkin, he got in huge win for us, go Team Red. Or yes, Kyle, is free, like big win for justice, and get carried away by that. I'm really trying to stay calm and say, okay, what's happening? Like, what do I see? What are the patterns I recognize? And I say, okay, well, pattern one, is there a narrative coming from Fox? Okay, pattern two, what are the other mainstream media carrying? The other thing too is I see that whenever the mainstream media, whenever the establishment, the social media, et cetera, whenever they want to attack something, they try to relate it to the 17 movement. And that's not a movement that I was really following too heavily or really kind of involved with. I mean, I know some things about it, but what you can see now is that whenever there's an enemy, they say, oh, this guy's a 17 conspiracy theorist, right? And so that's instantly what they use. And to me, though, that tells me there's something about that they don't want to be revealed, especially when they go and they mock it. Like, oh, these tinfoil hat lunatics believe that there's this satanic group of evil people ruling our world. And it's like, why are you mocking that? Why are you trying to make that sound so absurd? And it's like, even I remember there was a press conference when Trump was still in, and they asked him about that. And it's almost like they wanted him to speak out against it. And his response was brilliant. And I forget exactly what it was, but it was kind of like, someone asked him about, like, they believe that they're going after these satanic, pedophiles, et cetera. And Trump was kind of like, well, would that be a bad thing? It was just it was the perfect answer. So looking at all these things together, going back to your original question, I think that anybody who gets in the front of our society, celebrities, et cetera, there are a lot of forces pulling strings to try to control the narrative that comes from them, which is why we rarely see celebrities standing on the right side of history, because they got to where they are. They got to be the A-list actor. They got to be the platinum selling musician through slowly giving up their individual autonomy and slowly becoming part of this controlled entity. And the ones that try to step out of it, they hang themselves, they have drug overdoses, their career just goes into the toilet. Like, look what happened to Mel Gibson once he started speaking out against Hollywood. So Yeah, so I've got a lot of thoughts like that. That's the overall way I'm trying to look at things. So
Absolutely. I mean, when we take Kyle Rittenhouse out of the picture, and we just focus on what the attack looks like towards Linwood, whether it was from Kyle House or the deep state, the characteristics of the attack is a very deep state characteristics that we've seen before. So for me, it sounds like something that they've bought his emotions, Kyle Rittenhouse's emotions, so he can turn on Linwood and possibly make Linwood look bad, so that they could break the truth community apart, or the white hats apart. That's what it sounds like to me, and that's my opinion. So what are your views on why we are being distracted right now? What are we actually being distracted from?
Oh, good question. Well, I think that it's two things. On the plus side, I think that things are intensifying because we're uniting. And that's why I think that, with Rittenhouse, with the Christmas parade, and Daryl Brooks, the massacre that the media refuses to call even a massacre. They say it's a SUV incident that killed 7 people or 6 people. It's a whole other story to kind of dig into. But I think that they're trying to reignite a race war. So I think that part of these distractions are because more people are waking up and more people are seeing the truth. More people are seeing the truth about what happened November 3rd. They're seeing the truth about what's happening in the White House and what Biden is really doing and all the lies behind him. So I think that from one, the establishment, the elites, they are frightened because people are coming together. Look at the protests, the massive protests you see happening all over the world. Millions of people coming out all over the world to protest and stand up against the medical tyranny that they're trying to implement. So that's one thing I think that the distractions are serving to break apart the community of people that have come together to fight for the truth. And I'm seeing it happen. I think the other thing, though, is that, say in America, which, it's interesting because depending on which area you're in, like where I'm at, I'm in more of a rural Ohio area. You don't feel like there's a pandemic. I go to the store, there's no masks. You see a billboard pushing the jab occasionally, but it doesn't feel like there's much happening. Now, other parts of America, they're intensifying and they have the mandates for the masks and stuff. They have like New York City, which is the extreme, and say San Francisco, which is the extreme. But in a lot of ways, people probably might feel like things are getting a little back to normal. And I think that that's also what a lot of the distraction is to get the eyes off of these mandates and off of this medical tyranny. Because if you look at what's happening in Australia, which I focus a lot on understanding what's happening in Australia, and I'll share with you why in a second here. But Australia, Austria, Germany, Spain, these European countries, if you look at what's happening, you can see that the plan that I know that yourself and myself as well, we've been trying to expose this plan to our audience through talking about Operation Lockstep. How in 2010, the Rockefeller, they put out this document outlining exactly what we're seeing here about basically bringing in a global tyranny under the guise of keeping us safe. If you look at Event 201, if you look at all these different things leading up to where we are now, you can see that there has been a long-term plan, which I think started decades and decades and decades ago, a long-term plan to bring us into the state that we are right now, where they can move the entire world population under a tyranny, under a global centralized system, under the guise of keeping us safe, and under the guise of protecting your neighbor, these kinds of things. And now going back to Australia, which I think that these are things that we're being distracted from. I think that Australia, in a lot of ways, is a testing ground. Mm-hmm. Australia is a country that doesn't have the same roots as America, right? It was originally, more or less, it was a prison colony, as I understand the history there. There was a lot of people that were sent there. It wasn't like America and our founding here, or a lot of the areas, the countries in Europe that have a deep history. So also Australia is heavily, heavily tied and owned by China in many, many ways. So they've lost their freedom as a country long before the what you perceive to be the loss of freedom you're seeing right now. It's just that now it's hit the surface. The true reality of who's controlling Australia is now being seen. Whereas it may not have felt that way 10 years ago. It was this beautiful place to go and live, et cetera. So that's why I'm focused on Australia, is because I think that they're using that. They're showing us what their goal to do is, because they're not just going to stop at, well, okay, we've got a police state in Australia, and we've got some stuff happening in Europe, but Americans, they're pretty much free, and that's okay. Their plan is to implement a global great reset, and that's the reset of our freedom into tyranny through the use of the digital passports, the contact tracing, quarantining, quarantine camps. I mean, this is the thing, and this is what you and I have been warning people about for a very long time, especially you. You're very much still a veteran in this movement, saying, look, like, there's these really, really bad people in our world, and they've got this plan. They don't like us being free, right? They look at us as being the useless eaters, the cattle, right? They want to put a plan. They want to get rid of a lot of us, and they want to move us into this system where basically we're serving them to ensure they have everlasting life on earth, at the expense of all of us. And so this is the big thing that I believe we're being distracted from, is that while people are being, on one side, you have people that are, fearful of the new variant that's coming out, and they're fearful of people that haven't, taken the jab because they're putting them at risk. On the other side, you have people that are fearful of the jab, and they're fighting against that. They're afraid of losing their jobs. And you have all these things happening, while what's unfolding on a global scale is this domino effect of all these countries, that they're seeing how quickly they can move them into realistically a police state. And I think that it's going to get progressively worse across the world. And I think that the final battleground for this will be America. America is the last stand. It's the one place where the patriots we have the Second Amendment. We have the ways to protect ourselves, even how our government is set up through the Constitution. The sheriffs locally have more power than the president in a lot of ways. So I think this is what's unfolding. I think this is actually why they're trying to distract people so much, because they don't want people in America to look to these other countries like Europe or Australia and say, hey, that's not right. Like, what if they did that here? I think that they want to keep us distracted so they can move that in until the very last moment, when we wake up one day and we're like, oh my gosh, there's a barbed wire fence around me.
Absolutely. Now, we know that, I have to be very careful with my words. We know that the bad guys have been very bad for a very, very long time. And now we are seeing the climax of it right now.
Yes.
And it's all coming out. And the reason why I say it's coming out is because they are doing, I have to say, the bad guys are doing a great job at waking people up right now. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is something that I don't think they planned on. And I think that a lot of it ties back into Trump. Trump, the bad guys, they did not want Trump to win in 2016. And they put their systems in place to make sure he didn't win. It's just that he had such an overwhelming outpour of support from the U.S. citizens and the patriots that he won. And I think that if he wouldn't have won, you and I would not be speaking right now. We'd be in a very different situation. But he did, and that was a massive red pill event, to use the Matrix analogy. That was a massive thing for waking people up, and him being out in front, talking about fake news and all these things, people seeing it. I think so many people have woken up because of that. And so what they've done, though, it's interesting because, Trump laid all these seeds. He laid that foundation, right? Because if you look at what is it that we talk about people waking up? Well, what is it that puts us to sleep? Why are we asleep in the first place? Why aren't we not just awake as it is? Well, there's the education system. there's the mainstream media, Google, big tech, they're control the narrative. And so I think that the media plays one of the biggest roles, because you look at the introduction of the TV, and humanity really started going off course after the television came out. And literally we're being programmed, people sitting down every night to eat their dinners and just turn on their TV and, okay, what program should we watch, right? People literally being programmed to believe certain things. So with Trump coming out, exposing fake news for what it is and showing people, he planted all those seeds for people to say, wait, is there fake news? Is Anderson Cooper really lying to me? I was I could trust them. And so you have that foundation laid, but then you get to where we are now. And you're right. They're trying so hard to push this narrative that a lot of people, they're saying, wait, I can feel this now. Because before it's like there wasn't as much opposition to these lies. And so they could just kind of slip their lies in really easily. And people were buying it and just not thinking anything of it. But now, because there's this opposition, this pushback, their lies have had to get more and more intense. Now, one thing, for example, the Rittenhouse trial, I think that woke a lot of people up to the evil nature of the media. I saw so many people on, specifically on Twitter, on Facebook, talking about the fact, they said, wait, Rittenhouse didn't kill 3 black guys? Like, I was convinced that Rittenhouse had killed 3 black guys. It's like, no, he killed 3 white people. And it's like, that was a huge moment for a lot of people saying, whoa, like they're lying to me. And like, that's that trigger. And that's what you have to have, like, that's that moment. That is the red pill moment where it's just like something clicks and they're like, wait, the media is telling me a lie? Because that's the crack in their narrative, because then the next thing is like, well, what else are they lying about? And then you see that, the whole Russia, that entire thing is falling apart, where even some of the mainstream media are now talking about how the whole thing was a hoax. And so all these things are coming undone. So I think that what's happening right now is, it may not seem like it to us. And I think that especially for you and I and a lot of our core audience, when you've been looking at these things, there's this feeling that there's this giant group of really bad people that have such a strong grip on the world that it's almost as if we don't have a chance. It can feel like that sometimes. But I think that the reality, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, no, please. Please.
I think that the reality is, though, is that they're the ones that are truly panicking, because they're trying to move in their last step. But the last step requires them to unmask themselves. This is the key, is that the last step requires them to show the world for who they are. So it's the trickiest, it's the most dangerous stage of their game. It's almost like you're hunting an animal and you're tracking it, animal doesn't see you. As you get closer, at a certain point, you have to reveal yourself to that animal. If you're hunting, say now, obviously, if you're using a rifle, then you're hidden in a deer blind somewhere and you kill it. But say you had to capture by hand an animal, it's like the most dangerous stage of that is when the animal then realizes, oh my gosh, I'm being hunted. I can see you. You're hunting me, and that's what's happening. And I think that they are panicking. And this is something that I oftentimes will tell people. I say, look, they're afraid of us. Watch these politicians, watch Trudeau, watch some of these politicians in Australia or New Zealand or Europe. When they're up there and they're announcing these new measures and they're saying that, well, now you have to do this and we're not going to allow you to do this. You can't travel here. Look at their body language. Look at their mannerisms. They're nervous, because I think for a lot of these people, they're just being told what to say by some guy behind them. They know they're lying. They know that their people are seeing through them. They know they can't walk the streets anymore without being called out for what they are. So I think that that's the other thing. And going back to exactly what you said, it's like they're pushing so hard for the Great Reset that I actually think what they're doing is that they're really causing the Great Awakening in the process.
Absolutely. Now, we know that President Trump has awakened so many people, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions around the world as well, not just the US. Now, despite the media attacks, I understand that President Trump has a limit on what he can say to awaken people up, because if he says too much, he can be really attacked by the media and it could have a big impact on his strategy. So he has to play it down the middle. Now, if we never had fake news, and if we never had fake news, I presume or suspect that the strategy will be slightly different. It will be more relaxed. It'll be more strategic, but without this corruption of the media being considered in the strategy. So if we never had this media fake news, what do you think, how much more do you think Trump would awaken the public? And what do you think that extra awakening would be? What do you think he would talk about? What extra things do you think he would go into to wake people up about the things we've been lied to?
Great question. Yeah, well, one thing I will say is that I think that with or without the media, that if you, for instance, say you have an aunt that has only watched the BBC, right, from your perspective, and she's convinced that this is how things are, and she's completely bought into that, even though there's no one censoring you, if you're talking to you have to be very careful. You have to say, well, maybe let's consider that. What if the BBC was actually being, who are the big advertisers? Well, it's big pharma. Well, you'd have to maybe really be very cautious in that journey for her to understand you. And so I think that there's two sides to what's happening here. Is that one is, Trump has to be careful with his words, because if he says things that are too much, a lot of people that are, say, in the middle or left of the middle, even if those words aren't being skewed by the media, they won't be able to understand it. Because if you look at our world, and again, this gets back to this, cognitive dissonance, so much of what we see around us is a lie. The medical system is a lie. Look into the history of the medical center. Look at when, I think it was John D. Rockefeller took over the medical system and realized that they, controlling petroleum, right, which he did, he realized that they could make petroleum-based medicine. So they took over the entire medical system. The doctors at that time that were studying natural ways, using things that you could find out in nature to heal people and making compounds, were considered quacks and rooted out. And so, and then you brought in the medical industrial complex, right, which we have now, which we see the role that it plays in our society now. So everything, it's almost like everything that we've learned has been given to us in a way to push us towards the precipice of where we are right now. And so the process of seeing through these lies is not easy for people, because for some people, they might say, look, wait, have I been lied to my entire life? A lot of people, they don't have the psychological or the spiritual strength to accept something like that. It's like Plato's cave, right? The allegory of the cave, where everyone within the cave, all they see is shadows. It's all they've ever known. They don't know a real world exists. And the person that actually escapes the cave and sees the real trees, the real sun, the real birds, when he goes back in to say, look, I've seen the real things, no one believes him. And they end up plotting to kill this guy. Like, that was how extreme it was. And so I think that's part of what Trump is up against. I think that's part of what you and I are up against, right? How do we bridge the gap? Because we don't just want to preach to the choir. We want all of humanity to awaken and to see the truth about evil, the truth about communism, the truth about China and the role they've played in corrupting the world. But it has to be step by step. So that's one thing, is I think that Trump, that's just kind of to comment on that with Trump, what we would speak about. But the other thing is the media aspect. And so if Trump was not being censored by the media. Or let's just say the media were just even, say they just reported on the truth, right? Which is kind of a crazy concept, isn't it? And let's pretend that along with that, big tech also wasn't censoring. So I think that, and I'll have to censor what I'm saying a little bit because if we're still on YouTube, but I think that Trump would talk a lot about what happened November 3rd. I think that if the media wasn't complicit, they never would have gotten away with it. That's a big thing. So I think that he'd talk a lot about that. I think that he would also talk a lot more about human trafficking and child trafficking, because those are both topics that I've seen him touch on a lot. And he, even within the fake media, censoring everything, he still called attention to those things. And so I think that that's something he would spend a lot of time going over and revealing to people. I think that he, in a lot of ways, I think that what he would be doing would be exposing the corrupt people for who they are. And that's a key, right? Is because, we know that, as we were talking about earlier, it's like, well, who's bad? Who's good? I don't know. Well, I think that Trump, if you look at what he's doing now with endorsing candidates and the inverse, kind of canceling candidates that don't deserve to be there. I think that one thing that Trump has within his knowledge is who's good and who's bad. Now, can he be deceived? Of course, right? We can all be deceived. But I think that he has a firm understanding of which politicians are good, which ones are bad, which tech CEOs are bad, in what ways. So I think that if he had control of the media, I think that he would spend a lot of time helping people to see who the real enemies are and really calling out and exposing. Because, for people that say trust Google, hypothetically, what if he comes out and he says, look, do you realize this is what Google is involved with? Or Facebook or Twitter, some of the human trafficking and the child pornography stuff that they allow to exist on there. See, these are issues that it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, or whether you're straight or gay or black and white. If you realize that these media platforms are complicit in human trafficking, especially child trafficking, then a lot of people are going to turn their heads and say, wait, this is big. I can't ignore this anymore. And not to mention, I think a lot of the stuff that we hope to see come out with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, it's like, okay, yeah, we've got human trafficking, all these things. That gets into a whole other thing when you get into the, SRA, satanic ritual abuse, and you get into those kinds of things. There's a whole other can of worms of information that I think that the general public needs to know about. But right now, it's like, well, as we talked about earlier, what happens when you talk about that? They say, oh, there's this conspiracy theorist talking about these pedophile rings ruling the world. They mock people. So without the media coming out with that narrative, if you could actually get in front of a camera and on a larger scale say, look, this is what we know. This is what the world leaders are doing. This is how the world leaders have been controlled and blackmailed. I think that what you'd see happening is the undoing of the control that the cabal has on the world.
Absolutely. And the way things are happening right now, people are waking up for sure, even if the deep state are doing a great job waking people up. And we have to know what's going on, because we can't move forward as humanity into the free world and not know what's happening, because we have to know, we have to be aware, we have to wake up so that history does not repeat itself. But Seth Holehouse, it's been an absolute honor to have you once again on my show. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
Well, I think that the big thing is that, and again, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. The big thing I would say is try to develop your discernment. And I think fundamentally the discernment comes through faith. And so try to root yourself in your spirituality, your faith, and let that be the guiding light through this, because I think that we are entering into a very difficult period. And it's a period that's going to test us to our very core. And I think that those who will make it through to whatever's awaiting on the other side will be the ones that have found a strong footing in faith to get them through. So something I would hope to impart with this is that it feels dark and scary, which it is, but personally, I do believe that the old hashtag is right. God wins. So I do think that we'll come out on top. So just kind of keep in there and keep your head up, keep your faith strong. Try to develop your discernment. Those are the key things. And also, just as more of a housekeeping note, if you do want to follow me, you can find me on Telegram at Man in America. My website's maninamerica.com. You can check me out. We've also got our streaming platform, Rise TV, which is risetv.com, which is kind of we say it's the non-evil, non-satanic version of Netflix, trying to build a Patriot-owned, kind of streaming platform. So those are where I'm active. Telegram is the most common one, similar to you, Nick. And again, Nick, just thank you for having me on here. I hope that the things that we talk about can be more than just scary. I hope that we can help kind of awaken some people and shake up a little bit and have people say, you know what, it's time to really step forward and seek out the truth and do what's right.
Absolutely. When we try to love one another, forgive one another, and we leave our egos outside as much as we can. I know it's difficult because we're human. That's when we will experience a drop in the level of fear. And I will happily leave your links below, Seth. It's been an absolute honor. Thank you very much, and we'll speak very soon. God bless you.
Great. Thank you, Nick.